Thank you so very much, and welcome to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families, Children's Bureau, and presented by ICF International. Today's roundtable features a distinguished panel from 3 states who will discuss their experiences and challenges of developing and implementing an education data exchange. I am Joyce Rose, your host and facilitator for today's discussion. Next slide, please. Attendees are encouraged to participate in the roundtable with questions or comments. All of the participant lines are muted now, but we will open them for the Q&A session at the end of the discussion. However, please be aware that you can submit questions at any time using the GoToWebinar chat feature on your screen, and those will be queued up and addressed during the Q&A session. Once today's roundtable has ended, you may submit additional questions to the email address listed on the slide or to your federal analyst. Next slide, please. We have a very large virtual roundtable that actually extends from Wisconsin to New York to Kentucky. So let's meet our panelists, starting with Kentucky. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Hello. My name is Gretchen Marshall. I'm an Assistant Director with the Division of Protection and Permanency.
I'm Jeff Howard. I'm the IT Project Manager.
Keith Flora, IT Business Analyst.
Sudharsan PJ, Twist Development Lead.
And New York?
Good afternoon. This is Jason DeSantis. I'm a Program Manager with the Child Welfare and Community Services Division.
Good afternoon. My name is Vajira Durbarila. I'm the Assistant Director for Research, Evaluation, and Performance Analytics at OCFS.
Hi, my name is Eileen Martin. I'm the Assistant Director for Information Systems Solutions.
And I'm Lisa Gartio-Gandimo, Assistant Commissioner for Child Welfare for the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. And I believe we have someone from New York City, the Administration for Children's Services, on as well.
Hi, this is Karen Budis, ACS Office of Education Support. Just standing in for my boss, Assistant Commissioner Kathleen Hoskins, which will be joining a little bit later. She apologizes for her delay.
Thank you. And Wisconsin?
This is John Elliott. I'm the Deputy Administrator for our Division of Safety and Permanence at the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, and we have oversight supervisory responsibility for child welfare and youth justice in the state of Wisconsin.
Okay, thank you so very much. Next slide, please. So our panelists will be answering a series of questions related to the following topics: the background and history relating to their data exchange with their education department, the primary challenges associated with it, certainly data security, data use and issues, current and future plans, and of course, always lessons learned. And I trust those topics will give rise to an informational as well as a lively discussion. So let's begin by asking Kentucky to start the discussion. And the first question is, describe the background and history of your data exchange with your Department of Public Education or Public Instruction. Which agency initiated the exchange? What were the information needs that prompted that effort? And did you immediately have the support of your counterpart agency and the leadership of both agencies as well?
So requirements gathering began in 2011 when the Department of Education requested an interface with child welfare to receive information on the children in our foster care population so that they could be automatically enrolled in free and reduced lunch. The exchange became bidirectional in 2016 when the Child Welfare Agency requested educational data back from the Department of Education, and we started gathering requirements in 2015. The agency leadership from both entities was immediately supportive.
Fantastic. And Wisconsin and New York, would you like to add on to what Kentucky had to offer?
This is Wisconsin, and I can talk about our history. Our our history with our Department of Public Instruction, which oversees our K-12 system in the state of Wisconsin, started back in 2012, where we were awarded a federal grant, joint federal grant, to improve the infrastructure of information sharing with child welfare and public education, and also to improve educational outcomes for children out of home care. So that's where we kind of started and developed some changes for research purposes to really understand how our kids on home care are doing, but also then for operational purposes.
And New York?
Hi, this is Lisa from New York State, and I'm sure ACS will jump in as well. I think everyone started around the same time, around 2011, 2012, when the federal government pulled together the teams for the Fostering Connections work. That's when we started. We revised an MOU that we had in development for quite some time, but really had not received any traction, and started a partnership with our partners in SCD. ACS, do you want to add to this? I know you received a federal grant around that time as well.
Yes, we did receive a federal grant, and we worked with our Department of Education here in New York City on the MOU. And then we continue to meet with our agencies monthly just to always provide pointers on how to use the data that we receive.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on? All righty, then let's move on to question number 2, which Wisconsin is going to take the lead in responding to. John, what were the primary challenges faced from the perspective of governance, which included negotiating the data exchange agreement and the shared governance structure? From a technical aspect, designing, building, testing, implementing the interface, and from an administrative perspective, your change management process. And then I would like you, in particular, to discuss your education grant and testing of the portal in one county.
Okay. So I'll try to stitch some of that together in a comprehensive way. So when we applied for this grant, part of it was, again, is we saw a lot of research nationwide that showed that educational outcomes for kids in our home care were poor, graduation rates were low, other things, absenteeism were high, but we did not have any good data from a Wisconsin perspective to show how our kids were doing. And so that grant really gave us the opportunity to work together with our Department of Public Instruction. And just a little kind of nuance or background about Wisconsin that I want to say makes it interesting or could be more difficult is that, first of all, so I think most people may know we're similar to New York in that we're a state-supervised county administered system, and so we have 72 counties. We are responsible for the county of Milwaukee. The state runs that child welfare system because of a federal lawsuit several years back. But the rest of the 71 counties are administered at the county level from a child welfare perspective. And then from a public education perspective, there's actually 432 school districts in Wisconsin. And again, they probably have a little bit less policy authority over those school districts than we do over county child welfare agencies, in the sense that they can make policy guidance to school districts, but policy is really left up to individual school boards unless there's state laws that dictate that. And then also the interesting piece about our public instruction is that they have a separate elected official. The superintendent of basically the Department of Public Instruction is not part of the governor's cabinet and is a separate elected official. So that adds a little bit of a nuance to it. And they're both from different parties. So with that as a backdrop, when this grant came about, we approached them, and DPI was very interested in this too, because one of their goals is to increase graduation rates overall for the state of Wisconsin, and particularly in at-risk populations. And we would look at the foster care population as an at-risk population. And at the same time, they had just put in a request in their budget process to develop a more unified data collection system throughout the state of Wisconsin. So right now, at that time, each individual school district has their own data collection, and they only reported their data to the Department of Public Instruction twice a year. So they did not have real-time data, those type of things. So they were moving down a direction to have a more centralized data collection system, management system for all their educational data, similar to what we already have. We have a SACWA system for case management and data collection in the child welfare system. So this grant came at a perfect time for us to kind of really do two things, and we developed a data sharing and an MOU with them, as I alluded to before, to number one is to do research. And so we entered a data sharing agreement with them to have the University of Wisconsin-Madison Institute of Research of Poverty match our data at a level, administrative level, so that we could see how our kids are faring, from graduation rates to test scores to absenteeism to those type of things. And then the second component that we worked on, since DPI was working with a lot of different school districts in implementing a data system throughout their local school district statewide, they put in a process then where they had a data exchange or interface where then they could develop different portals for different user groups to get access to educational information. So at the time that we were doing this grant, the Uniform Scholars Act had not passed yet. So we worked closely with Dane County here in Madison and Madison School District, and with DPI, we worked closely with our local partners to help them develop an MOU and a data sharing agreement where they would then be able to share, basically they developed off their IT system a different user group for child welfare workers where they could get access to their particular caseload, the children on their caseload information from absenteeism to suspensions to expulsions to reasons for those expulsions, historical information about their grades, their absenteeism, those type of things. So we developed a very specific portal that child welfare workers would have access to. And then we also developed a security protocol with our SACWA system and their system that would match that information and data so that, A, gave confidence at the local school district level that that information was provided in a secure manner and they only had access to students that were on their caseload, so they didn't have access to all students in the Madison School District, but only those students that were in out-of-home care. And so that was the basis of developing that system, and I can talk later about more kind of where we're evolving, where that system now has evolved in kind of where we're going in the future.
Great. Thank you, John. Kentucky, tell us about your primary challenges in relation to perhaps the technical side of this, as well as your administrative change management process.
So in terms of challenges, I think that what we discussed in preparation for this meeting was the time that it took. We did a lot of stakeholder meetings to decide the data elements, the frequency, how the matching would take place. That took some time to do. We did testing. Testing was completed with both departments working together to create test cases with sample data to make sure the matching and data returned was formatted correctly and could be read on both sides. TWIST formats the data as a report for child welfare workers. History is maintained to show trends in behavior, GPA, course information, demographic information on the child, and for the child welfare workers, that's displayed in the child-specific case record that the caseworker has access to. And then some of the programmers may want to chime in. It's an XML schema that's used to interface the file format with MoveIt FTP for transfer. As far as the administrative process and the change process, any changes to the independent systems that don't affect the interface can be made without involving the other department. Monthly meetings are available to discuss needs for any changes in the interface data, with an annual review meeting to discuss lessons learned or any new needs on either interface side.
And when with both agencies involved, how do you prioritize the changes?
We have a release meeting every couple of months or so, where we define, we're usually 2 releases ahead, and we define all the changes that are going to go in unless there's something that's really high priority where we have to have emergency releases. But all of those requests, all of those change requests from Kentucky Department of Education and with our child welfare are all matched up, and they're prioritized and applied to releases as they go forward.
And New York, what might you have to add to this discussion?
In regards to the change management process, we also have a change management committee made up of about 3 dozen members that meets monthly. And we have a standard change request form that we use for any requested change for our child welfare information system in general. So the committee kind of reviews them and will ask questions and try to determine what effect, if any, that change will have on a different component, various other components of the system. Once that committee approves the change, then it goes up to the executive level for program and for ITS, who will review the changes and prioritize them.
And Jason, was that you?
Yes, it was. Yes.
And while I have you front and center, let's thank you, and let's move on to how data security is addressed. Jason?
Actually, we're going to turn to Eileen for that.
Perfect. Eileen?
Our child welfare system already had an education module which allowed for user entry of education information. So all of the security was already in place for who had read and write access to that information. So we were able to add a link to that window to access the state education data and use all of the existing security that was already in place. We did have one element of the MOU was that we had to keep track of what workers had access to state ed data and for which child. So we met that requirement by creating a table in the database that audits all of the users and tracks the date, the agency, the child, and the worker that performed that access. And we actually found that that allowed us to monitor which agencies and districts were using the data.
Well, it sounds like yours was pretty straightforward and rather easy, I might say.
Actually, we skipped New York Technical, and that was one of my comments, that we really didn't have any issues with design, building, and testing. We really thought that one of our hurdles would be coming up with a matching algorithm for the child, and it turned out that New York State Ed was already using a software called Choice Maker, so they did all the matching for us, and that had already been tested, and it was in production on their side, so we were able to use that.
I think for New York, the greatest challenge was sitting down and developing the terms of the MOU, getting everybody to the table, but once we were able to iron that out, it was relatively smooth from that point to today, I think.
That's great. So, John Elliott of Wisconsin, would you like to tell us about how you address the data security issues?
Sure, and yeah, ours has been evolving, and I'm not a tech person, so I'm not going to talk about the technical aspects of it, but I can talk about it at a high level.
That's fine.
When we had the grant, of course, one of the barriers, I think, at the local level was, again, for them, because the Uniform Scholars Act had not been passed yet, or it had not. We also had to codify that in state law. Had not been done yet. They were obviously worried about it from a FERPA perspective about who got information. So they started basically with a paper-based system and used their kind of in-user agreement. But we knew longer term we had to have a more automated solution or it would not work. So at that same time, we were able to develop an automated solution, work with our Department of Public Instruction, where they go through a cake site where it does match information. And that has been evolving and improving over time. So we did have to develop a matching algorithm, which looks at mother, date of birth, kid's last name, those type of things. But so that matches nightly, and I think we initially had about a 95% success rate, a match rate. So it was fairly successful. Since then, we are evolving where our Department of Public Instruction, every student in the state of Wisconsin has what they call a WISE-ID. So they have a specific ID. So we are now being able to get that ID into our system also, so that makes the matching easier. So our matching success rate has gone up, and again, we're able to do that nightly. So I will say, future-oriented, we are now moving in a direction where we're moving away from that portal, that individual portal, and integrating it into our SACWA system. Now that our Department of Public Instruction system has evolved, where they now have developed basically a data warehouse that the individual schools can report their information, and 70% of the school districts report on a nightly basis, and the other 30% I think are on a monthly basis. They have much more real-time data, and then in that data warehouse they do the manipulation to make it compatible statewide. So we are now able to start working with our Department of Public Instruction to start integrating that data directly into SACWIS with that matching protocol, so that all workers statewide would have that information. And we're starting right now on a very small pilot project where we're going to integrate disability status information, so whether they have an IEP, a 504 plan, what their primary and secondary disability is, and kind of what school district the student goes into. And we're implementing that from the initial assessment phase all the way through ongoing.
Great. Kentucky?
We're lucky to have both systems statewide. We don't have to worry about county-based systems. And our security is twofold. Between the two, education and child welfare system, we use MOVEit FTP for file transmission, and it's secured that way. Each application is controlled, and authorized users are only allowed to access their applications and their caseloads. And the data is within each application's portal. So child welfare workers will go to child welfare system to see their data, and education users will go to their system to see child welfare data. The data transmission is protected, database is encrypted, so that's how we manage our security. We did have the same matching issues initially, but now our match rate has improved after significant improvements to the algorithms. And the biggest thing we found out was children in private schools and underage children, like children under 5, were not found on the education system. So that's something for you to consider when you start this interface to see how you can eliminate those populations.
Very interesting. And thank you very much. And as we move to the next question, which
Can
is
we add, before you go, this is New York, Vajira. I just want to add something more on our security.
Okay.
We brought in all the data into our data warehouse, and in there also we have created a separate role for the education data, where only people that actually work on the data have access to the data. And using the data warehouse, you're also creating some reports that I'll get into later, but with those reports also we are planning to create security where only those that actually need to see the data will see it. So it's an enhanced level of security for the education data compared to some of the other data.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for adding that. We are moving on to the next question, which is more about the specifics of the data exchange, but I've noted that as we've moved through the first 3 questions, we actually have been talking about both the child welfare data elements and the education data elements. And also, tell us how the flow of information is it bidirectional one way, and what is the frequency and method that triggers the data exchange? And let's start with Kentucky.
Okay. Ours is a bidirectional interface. We categorized our data into 3 broad categories. We have the school data itself, which gives details about the school, location, address of the school, the principal, and that type of stuff. And then we have student information, which is more related to the student, their scores, their grades, and their behavior data, which is if they had any suspensions or absenteeism and that type of stuff. From a child welfare perspective, I think we share the county placement, the child's demographics and stuff, which help with the matching on the education side. That's how we start our interface, is we send the children, they match, and then we get back education data for the children that are in our care. And when a child drops out of care, we inform them, and we no longer have access to the education data when they're no longer in our custody.
Thank you. New York? Additions?
Basically, kind of a semi-bidirectional data feed. We send over basic demographic information for children in foster care, and SED returns course and grade data, statewide standardized testing assessments, educational programs for special populations, attendance records, and enrollment. The frequency of that data, I think we have some challenges there. Since the data is only due to state ed at certain points in the year, we don't have really up-to-date data. So at the end of the school year, the first Monday in September, state ed starts receiving the data from the end of the previous school year, and they continue to receive that until January. So we get that once a year. Then the enrollment and grade level data we receive twice a year, so in November and January. And then if new children come into foster care, we can send an on-demand request to get information for those children. Our data is exchanged through a BizTalk orchestration. BizTalk is a middleware system that enables us to automate processes that allow communication between the two systems. All of the interfaces are triggered based on an entry in an Oracle table with the dates in every year that when we should send over a request, what we're looking for. So we assemble a flat file and send the request to SED, and the data exchange is accomplished using SFTP and predefined file formats. So each data request includes the request type, whether it's end-of-year data, enrollment and grade level, whatever we're looking for. And then when the request is complete, SED sends 15 data files back to our educational data set. We import those into staging tables and then prep them for insertion into our production database.
And in New York City, our file transfer with the New York City Department of Education follows the same model. We send them over a match file monthly, and then they'll send that back. So we get the attendance monthly. When course and grades come out, that's added. It's added to the match when available. We also get the special education information. We don't get what type of special education class setting they're in, but just if they're flagged as special education or not. And then when the DOE indicates that students are promotion in doubt, we get that information in February. And then so if students enter care, they'll be added to the next match. And then if a student drops off, they'll come off the match.
This is Lisa from New York State. I wanted to point out, as was stated earlier, New York is state supervised, county administered, and we have about over 500 school districts. And as Eileen pointed out, the information that we get from OCF, from the state office, is what's reported up to our state education department from the locals. The data arrangement that ACS has with the New York City Department of Education allows them to have information that's a little more real time and some more detailed information that's not necessarily reported to state ed. So one of our challenges is that there's only we from the state only see what state ed receives from the locals, but there's additional information that would require some additional MOU similar to what ACS has developed with the New York City Department of Education. But it's challenging because they have five. You have ACS and you have one city Department of Education, but then you have we have 56 other counties and hundreds of other school districts. So we're trying to figure out how to help the local districts navigate all of these partners that completely can become overwhelming for a local district.
Well, you have a colleague on, John Elliott from Wisconsin, who's also a state-managed, county-administered state. So perhaps he can help you out with some of those challenges.
So what we're doing, and again, like I said, it has been involving. When we had the education grant, we had to work at an individual school district to county level, again, which is not ideal because one county, can have probably, 5+ school districts within that county. So in the pilot, in this case, they only had access to one individual school district. And so we knew longer term, that's not an ideal solution to have individual counties basically get permission from individual school districts to get access to their information and still have to not get it all electronically. So as our state Department of Public Instruction system has evolved to where now they are getting nightly and monthly feeds from their local school districts, we are now working with them to do that data exchange. Now, there is some downsides. At the state level, they don't have a lot of the detailed information like about suspension and expulsions, like the reasons why. So like why somebody was expelled, what behavior reasons was it, or same thing with the suspension. It just tells us whether they suspended or expelled. Where at a local school district level, the portal that we tested had that information. So there is some useful information at the local level that you won't get at the state level. So there is some downsides with that. But longer term, operationally, that is going to be a more amenable solution for everybody and an easier solution to populate in statewide systems. So I would say operationally we're moving in that direction, and that's mostly one directional, is that we're matching our data and bringing education data in, and as I mentioned before, we're starting with that disability information, and then we'll basically, hopefully over the next 2 years, get a full robust system of exchanging all the key components that we believe are important for child welfare workers to have, like absenteeism, grades, historical information, those type of things. So that's where we're going. But we have also, I would say, are also developing some bidirectional exchanges. One is a little bit more, I think, voluntary on part of the child welfare piece, and another one will be more systematic between the two state agencies. So one thing I didn't mention in my opening comments is about some of the change management challenges that we have. When we went on that pilot that we've done, we did some focus groups and surveys and stuff with education and with child welfare, and there is definitely a large gap of mistrust between the two agencies. On the educational side, there's a lot of mistrust about how they would use this information. There's a lot of issues around child welfare doesn't share information with education, those type of components. So there was a lot of those pieces out there that we had to overcome. So one of the things that we did on that bidirectional, especially the feedback that we got from education that nothing is ever shared with them, is that we actually utilized something that we got out of New York, where out of that grant, because they were part of that grant process too, where they developed what they call an education passport, which is voluntary by the child welfare worker, but it is pre-populated in our SACWIS system for a lot of the information, but is a way for child welfare to share particular information about that child that may be important, especially if they're changing schools, from, not because we can't share detailed medical or mental health issues, things of that nature, but where they can offer information in there about, who the foster parents are, all that contact information, things like that in one easy form. But they can also then put information about the child that may be important, things like there may be different trauma triggers that the child has that may be important for the school to know about. The student may be involved in certain extracurricular activities that are very important for the well-being of that child, so letting the school know about those things. So we've been slowly getting more and more child welfare workers statewide using that. I think the passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act is helping with that by having a point of contact in each county and in each school district. Educational point of contacts are now asking for that information, so I think they're putting some of the pressure on child welfare to get that information. So that's one way that is a more voluntary way that we're bidirectionally saving information. But the other piece where we'll have bidirectional interchange is as part of the ESSA requirements is that state public instruction agencies are supposed to report on the educational outcomes in the kids in out-of-home care. So we will have a bidirectional exchange there using the same security protocols I mentioned before, where our Department of Public Instruction will report out on their website by school district, the different educational outcomes of kids in out-of-home care. And then we will also use that as kind of a joint reporting mechanism on our website, link into their website from an accountability perspective on where those things are at.
Well, I think John just kind of segued us right into the next question, and that is basically how's data used in both systems. And New York, would you like to kick us off, please?
So this is a great segue, and one of the things that I wanted to echo is the difference in the relationship since the signing of the implementation of ESSA. And I will stress that our state partners at New York State Department of Education have been great partners, but ESSA has really been a big motivator, not only from the state level, but from the local level as well, and forcing a different conversation. It's really at its nascent level, but we really are changing the conversation between child welfare and education around the importance of improving educational outcomes for children in foster care. So for us within child welfare, we're really focusing on just, understanding the data. That's been the biggest part. I remember when we first started working on the MOU, we were meeting with other states, and they were talking about getting the educational data. Is just the beginning. And once we had the MOU signed and we received that first data file, and I opened it, I realized, oh, my God, I don't even know what we're doing. What do we do with all of this information? So that was the start. And then the work really began. It was then requiring us to, on the state level, figure out how to just present it in a way that's usable. We have our educational information in a separate window, so the data is populated in a folder within our connection system, which is our system of record. But you have to go to another tab, so it's another piece of work for caseworkers, which we know when they're doing all of the other things that they have to do, this becomes a challenge. So we're using it right now in a way to at least start the discussion. As stated before, having those points of contact under ESSA, we had started developing our own points of contact within child welfare, but having a partner in education is really helpful. It's taken a while. Child welfare and SED have been working over the last year as SED, State Ed, is implementing their state plan, had been developing their ESSA state plan. We'd identified points of contact for both systems and have worked over the last year to develop a toolkit, which, when systems get together, it takes a while to just get a 20-page document out to the field. So we have worked tirelessly to develop the plan and a training model, which we are going to share with both systems starting in January of next year. The work, I feel that the data has not moved as far as we would like it to move, and a little different in New York City because they do have, and we can let ACS speak to that. I think that they're much further ahead than we are across the state. But what's been good is that we've been able to develop in a number of counties these collaboratives that really are modeled on the collaboratives that the federal government set up initially with Fostering Connections, with child welfare, education, and the courts at the table. We've been able to pull together in a number of our larger counties these teams where you have courts asking about how kids are doing in school, child welfare coming to the table with an understanding that, this family court judge is really going to ask me about performance, and then education really trying to partner with child welfare also to understand the needs of kids in foster care and how we can work differently. So we have, I think, over the last few years, changed the conversation. You know that there is a different conversation happening, but still lots of work to come. From our state office, we've been able to develop initial research reports just to show, again, we've spoken anecdotally that our kids are not faring well in foster care just educationally, and the team was able to come up with reports, statewide reports, and also some county reports to show that it's more than anecdote. Here's the data. We pulled it apart to show graduation rates, performance on state exams, and then also promotion rates as well. So that was really an eye-opener, things that it sort of reinforced things that we had known, but to see the numbers in black and white really did force a collective understanding that this is a key element to our safety, permanency, and well-being that we have not, as a system, really addressed. So having the data has been a way to change a conversation. Having ESSA has really, because sort of education, we are still a small subset of all of the kids that they have to educate, but looking at how poorly we're faring, even compared to other vulnerable populations, foster care youth are still, performing far worse, really did force education to understand we have to do something different as a collective. So the data has moved an agenda in a way that, and then the federal law as well, has moved an agenda in a way that we would not have been able to do as quickly as we've been able to do it.
You personify, I think, the old adage that you can have lots and lots of data.
Yes.
But to turn it into meaningful information is something that I think I hear you have done.
Still a work in progress.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit more on some of the things we've used. This is Vajera. So in addition to what Lisa described, being able to create these profiles of children in foster care, the education profiles, looking at disabilities, comparing grade enrolled versus the age, expected grade for age, academic achievement, school exit. So that's been really nice to have that. But this data also has helped us with our federal reporting, specifically some of you are aware with National Youth in Transition Database, NITED reporting, and we had two elements where we just couldn't get, based on education, that we just didn't have the data, and only specifically on sort of grade completed and special education. With the data we got from SCD, we were able to actually achieve compliance and avoid penalties with that submission. And we also have another file, which is the ASCA, so Adoption Foster Care Monitoring System file, or ASCA 2.0 that's coming up, where we are hoping to use the data we get from SCD to achieve compliance on a couple of items there. And to sort of extend what Lisa was talking about, we are also working on creating reports within the data warehouse, where we will create aggregate reports with drill-through capacity, where a county or agency can go in and look at their achievement or the disabilities or different profiles, and then identify which children, the drill-through capacity will let them go in and identify which children they would need to go and address the issues with. So allow case management as well as performance management.
Well, I sense a certain amount of enthusiasm there, and that's really, really cool to hear. Kentucky, Wisconsin, do you want to add something?
So what I would add from the child welfare side is that the education data for children in foster care for the child welfare case manager is displayed for them in the child's case record, and so that gives that worker at their fingertips specific information about the child's enrollment, performance, their courses, their testing, whether or not they have a special education identifier, and it's invaluable from a case manager's perspective with regard to how to support that child in foster care attain their educational goals. It's really helpful with case planning. It's helpful to have that information, to have conversations with foster parents, also around supporting that child and attaining their educational goals, and it's helped with rapport, I would think, between the child welfare case manager and the educator to ensure that they both have real-time information and the information about the child's case manager and the system where they're enrolled in their educator. That's part of the exchange. They have that identifying information quickly. And we have someone from the Department of Education here, but I understand that it's helped them with their federal reporting for the first time they're able to report on this population, and that they can also compare children in foster care, their education outcomes, both locally and statewide.
Great. John, Wisconsin.
The only thing that I would add to that, and I agree with everything, and again, we're evolving at getting that information, but we also have a joint strategic planning team where we develop a joint strategic plan with our Department of Public Instruction. And so we also realize that it's not just about the data. So having the data is great, but educating our workforce on how to use the data how to use it in collaboration in discussions with schools, in interacting with the foster parents and that thing of those nature. Also working with our school system so they can educate those points of contact about that information and how schools can work together better with child welfare. So I think we're looking at it more holistically. It's not just the data itself, but then how you utilize that data in different mechanisms. And again, that's an evolving process, so we do have a strategic plan that we develop with our Department of Public Instruction. And there's bumps in the road every once in a while, but we're, I think, moving in a very positive direction to provide that information. And some of our challenges, too, with 432 school districts and 72 counties, is that some of those counties or school districts may have a kid in foster care like once every year or once every couple of years. So versus other school systems like Milwaukee and Madison in our bigger urban areas, they constantly have kids in foster care. So that school system itself is more used to working with kids in foster care and have different supports and processes in place. So we're also thinking about how do we support those smaller entities and school districts to support those kids that typically don't have kids in foster care all the time.
And if New York City could just weigh in quickly, we meet monthly with our agencies. We have 28 subcontracted foster care agencies, so we really facilitate a peer learning environment. When we meet, we want them to kind of share their best practices with each other. Some agencies have used the data to write grants, to start tutoring programs. They really like having accumulated credit information for their high school students so they could really zone in and see who's on track to graduate and who's not. And we really use the data to just identify risk factors specifically for our students that are overage for grade and those that are flagged as repeating a grade. So when our files we go through our files with the agencies, and we'll put filters in Excel so we could really drill down and see how many 8th grade students are repeating, how many of those students are below attendance. So we really try to just give practical strategies to use the data. And the DOE, our local Department of Education partner, also attends the meeting monthly, which is helpful.
Great. And once again, as we've moved through our discussion, you have talked about future data exchange plans, current and future data exchange plans. Is there anything else that you want to add to that topic of what's coming next? John, you talked about your child disability information.
Yep. So, I think it's also we're also in the midst of evaluating in the feasibility of CCWIS and going to that. So I think we're keeping that in mind, too, as we potentially transition our current SACWIS system into CCWIS. And, of course, data exchanges are a requirement under that, which I think we're well positioned for that. But what does that mean for us as a state, and what other opportunities? So I think we continue to work with our Department of Public Instruction and really have a better understanding of what data they have and they don't have, and what we could get in workers' hand that is useful. There is other information that they don't have that we have separate data exchanges, or I would say more research projects on. So one example is graduation. So we know as a state our foster care population has about a 53% graduation rate, which is similar to nationwide, but we don't know why they're not graduating. And the problem is that type of information is housed at individual school districts. They don't get that information isn't put into the centralized database at our Department of Public Instruction. So we're continuing to work with them on, I would say, more research data exchanges where we work with our University of Wisconsin-Madison to do research, and that will be one of the projects that we'll be kicking off here in early next year, is to work individually with some of our larger school systems to get their information and data to understand why kids aren't graduating so that we can then hopefully develop some policy or legislative changes that would help alleviate some of those issues like credit transfer, short of credit, those type of things.
Great. Kentucky?
So in the future, one of the things that they want to work on is providing end dates as part of what goes to education, so that the Department of Education will have a record of a child exiting foster care. Infinite Campus provides indicators for child special needs, gifted, special education, and the child welfare system is working on a report that'll help, a management report to display those type of children with special needs or receiving special services. Also, in the long term, the Department of Workforce has the ability to track adults as they are employed within the state, college graduation rates, employment data, taxpayer status, being able to match children in foster care with the Department of Education in terms of their educational records, and then in the long term with the Department of Workforce should give us better longitudinal information related to foster children and their adult outcomes, in terms of employment, etc. And then I also think that as a lesson learned, one of the things that we talked about in preparation for this call was having a way to fix a match so that it's not constantly being exchanged, looking for a match and then matching back, but that once a child is matched, a way to flag that so that it's a permanent match and not necessarily resent back and forth.
Okay. And New York. Future plans?
I'll just start from the state and then turn to the city. For us, our goal is to just continue to enhance our research and reporting abilities so that you have the local school district as well as the Department of Child Welfare working together to identify those supports that kids need so that we're improving our graduation rates, our performance, all of the things that everyone has mentioned. But we feel that from where we sit in home office, it's making sure that you're pushing down enough information, enough relevant information so that you're continuing that conversation and that collaboration to improve outcomes. For ACS?
So this is Kathleen Hoskins from ACS. And I know my team member Karen has been on the call, so thank you, Karen. In terms of sort of pushing it forward, I think we sort of have to look at our match with the New York City Department of Education is pretty good and pretty fluid, but I think we also have to think about the kids who are placed out of districts and sort of how to bring them into the fold. And to enhance and make sure. So we're going to be working with the state to try to see if there's something that we can do that's attached to their match to sort of move that forward. In addition, I don't know if Karen mentioned, we also have at least one existing data match with the public university system here. So we're starting to look at outcomes for higher education as well as the majority of our students do attend the public universities in the city of New York. So sort of how to capitalize and utilize that data to sort of help with higher education outcomes as well.
Great. Kathleen, I'm pleased that you could join us, and yes, I would like to thank Karen for standing in for you. She did an excellent job.
And we're also working with the Department of Youth and Community Development to perhaps get a match going for the after-school programs that are run by that city agency.
Great. Well, that brings us to our final subtopic, and that's lessons learned. So I would like to ask each of you to share with your colleagues who are listening at least one or two key lessons that you have learned. Kentucky.
So the first lesson had to do with when defining the data elements that are needed, really giving consideration to those features of the child's development that are key to developing a good case plan and good service matching with regard to their behaviors, absenteeism, grade level, assessment, testing, etc. Additionally, accurate data is essential to the matching and critical to the success of the interface, especially the Social Security number. Using the tools to help verify this data is correct in each system really helps improve the matching results.
And John, Wisconsin?
So I would think from a state level perspective, I think lessons learned is that relationships are very important. So establishing, I would think, relationships at the Department of Public Instruction, and especially as people have left and gone, I think having a guiding document, and that's a strategic plan that I alluded to that we are developing with them, improves continuity across people leaving different agencies. Because we did have a downfall once a big advocate over at our Department of Public Instruction left for another job. We had a bunch of new people that had come on over to the Department of Public Instruction. So, and we did not at that point have that kind of guiding document of the things that we were working on together, so it took us a while to get back up to speed. So I think just establishing those relationships and establishing that kind of strategic plan, I think, is key to get everybody on the same page. And then I think the research that we did, the lessons learned in that piece, is that the research, I think, was very helpful in the sense of that it gave us some information to share on the education side about this at-risk population. And I think it helped open their eyes to where their role is in this and helping improve the education outcomes in the at-risk population, which then helps them overall improve their graduation rates and things at a state, which they're held accountable to from the federal government. So I think our lesson learned was that was really critical of having our own data and information about our kids that we could help and understand kind of where they're at and what the issues were to help us all understand what the ultimate goal was.
Great. And New York, both from a state and city perspective?
So I'll just jump in first from the state perspective. I think the most important thing is that you have to have buy-in from the top. I mean, our commissioner has been a great support to us, and you have to be persistent. You have to be committed. It is so hard to move our system, the child welfare system. For, caseworkers are inundated and they're busy, and there's so many different boxes that have to be checked to stop and say education is really important, not just an acceptance or continuing to tell your story yourself that our kids just don't do well in school. It doesn't have to be. That shouldn't be our default position. Our default position should be that our kids can do well and we need to provide the right support. But not only are you moving your system, you have to bring another system with its own challenges and structure that doesn't meet your needs to the table as well. So moving ourselves, moving the state education department, bringing your governor's office to the table as well to say, yes, this is a small subset of all of the kids across our great state, but we really have a duty to focus on these kids, and here's why. Putting this effort in gets to better outcomes, not just for this population, but across our many systems that these kids touch. So I think you have to be persistent, you have to be committed, you have to be passionate, because you're always advocating. You're always trying to bring people to the table. You're always trying to remind everyone that education is not an extra, this is not a nice, this is a necessary. It's safety, permanency, and well-being, and every one of those elements require our full attention.
Well stated. Kathleen?
I'm scared. I don't know if I should say anything after Lisa. I agree with everything Lisa said. And sort of in our experience, because we subcontract out to agencies, we were providing them with the data for their students, but really not giving them sort of instruction on how to use it and what it says and sort of how to figure out trends. And while, quality assurance people exist, they don't necessarily know what the education data is saying. So part of what we learned was that while we were sharing it and we had this great match, people didn't know how to use it. And so sort of having this monthly meeting that goes over the data, reviews the outcomes, and sort of having an opportunity, I think Karen mentioned this before, about, peer-to-peer learning is critical. The other thing is we have to understand that the data is a tool and the match is not infallible, right? So there are times when the match is going to be incorrect, and agencies have to understand, or, whoever's working with the child that receives the information has to understand that it's a starting point. but the education support doesn't just rest with that. And sometimes, I think having the match causes people to rely too heavily on it without sort of doing the ground level and individualization work that's required for good educational outcomes. And again, I have to, mirror Lisa's sentiment that if you don't have the Department of Education or your sort of education partner on board, it sort of makes it more difficult to sort of use the data in a more systematic way to sort of do big system reform. So, it helps that all of our commissioners have sort of been messaging that education is part of well-being. And while we do focus on safety and permanency, that well-being is a critical piece of our planning for children in foster care, and education is a critical piece of that as well.
Well, thank you so very much. And, when we started this discussion an hour ago, we had a couple of goals. One was to provide a lot of information, and secondly, to have a lively discussion, and I think we've succeeded in both of those goals. So thank you to our panelists. And this concludes the roundtable discussion. And I would now like to turn it over to Mr. Terry Watt, who is going to discuss the always interesting topic of cost allocation. Terry, next slide, please.
Hey, Joyce, thank you very much. I really appreciate your guidance here as we walk through this wonderful presentation into the states. Great job. You guys are doing, before we even get to CWIS, the kind of stuff that we envisioned with our CWIS rules, and I want to applaud you for the creative work that you're doing. Keep pushing that envelope. There are laws on both the education side and the child welfare side that basically mandate some exchange of information, so we need to keep breaking down the perceived barriers that some folks believe that are there, and share information that is useful to improving the outcomes of these kids and families that we're serving. Well done, guys.